Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Today is a very interesting Mobility Frontier episode. So Sven Beiker, the principal of the Silicon Valley Mobility, who has been an author with us for different publications, and Brian Kozumplik. Hey, Brian, Functional Safety Manager at Omnex. So today we are going to focus specifically on the EV and EV charging infrastructure, how things are kind of playing out, how we see the recent problems that we have witnessed, and that was on the news all the time, what these experts see, how they take that in terms of a step forward or a step back, how we see competition coming from outside the United States companies, and also how we see the future and how to solve the things that have come to worry us. So I'd like first to invite you both to introduce yourselves, and then we'll start with some questions. Thank you, everybody, for those who are here with us. If you have any questions and would like to address them, please put them on the chat. Cici will be monitoring them. Okay, Sven, please.
Sure, happy to. Well, good morning from sunny but chilly Palo Alto, California. Sven Beiker, automotive engineer out of Germany. Started my career in the mid-1990s at BMW in Munich at the corporate R&D center, working on chassis system, vehicle dynamics control system, which got me into Silicon Valley over 20 years ago now. And there I looked at trends and technologies when automotive was not really a thing in Silicon Valley back then in 2003. So Tesla actually was just being launched, but we had never heard of it until 2005, 2006. From BMW, I went to Stanford University to run the Center for Automotive Research at Stanford. This was in the early to mid 2010s. And that was all about those trends like automated vehicles, electric vehicles, connectivity, things like that, which eventually got me into consulting. And now I'm running, as you said, the small practice here in Silicon Valley, which is called Silicon Valley Mobility. So I do look at automation, electrification, and the future of mobility in general. I still have academic appointments, such as the Stanford Business School. And now also recently, I joined the university in Borås, Sweden, where I'm an adjunct professor.
Hey, congrats. I did not know that.
That's new, actually. That's the first time I'm saying this in public, and I thought it's a good opportunity.
Okay, good for you.
At SAE. So adjunct professor, pretty excited about this as well. So for me, you get a mix out of an industry and an academic perspective.
Thank you. Brian, it's an honor to have you here. Please talk about yourself.
Sure. And that's great accolades for you, Sven. And I met Sven last year at WCX, so it is a small world. Worked in industry mainly at Chrysler and at GM, a big stint for 30 years from like the early 80s on to, about 10 years ago. And in the last 10 years at General Motors, I worked on the Chevy Volt, the Bolt, the two-mode hybrid, and launched those electric vehicles at GM. And that was really some growing pains we had back then with battery management systems and chargers and interoperability and some of those. So I really cut my teeth for 10 years on electric vehicles at GM. But then I went to Next Year Automotive for 5 years and was a functional safety manager for ASIL-D steering systems. And that's a whole nother story about ASIL levels. You guys know it's pretty important to have steering that works. So we had a successful stint there. And then I've been at Omnex for about the last year as a consultant in safety and also in EVs. We've got an EV division at Omnex too. So written several edge reports. As you can see, I'm advertising there.
Yes, thank you so much. So has Sven. We're very thankful.
Monica and I was calling her almost every day, seemed like it, for about a year. So thank you, Monica, for putting up with me.
Sure.
Okay.
All right. So we have some questions, some that have already come from the audience, even prior to today, and some that we have been discussing for a while. And one of them that seems to be important to all of us seems that when it comes to electric vehicles here in the US and some other places in the world, we're facing a sobering reality. The market seems to be less ready to buy. And there is a range anxiety that's gone high again. And now coupled with charger anxiety. Okay, so from the perspective, Brian, that you see that is more linked to the traditional OEMs in a cold, well, Brian is in Detroit, right? Or the Michigan area. What is your take on that one? And then we'll go to California, where it's a different take.
Sure. Well, and obviously here in Michigan, it's still cool outside, even though it's sunny. Like in California, we're barely going to climb into the 50s. And if you know anything about battery management systems, you have to warm up that battery before it can be utilized at a high efficiency. And we had that rash of cold weather across the whole country. I think it was in the January timeframe or so. And then you heard all the news feeds about people being frustrated with their EVs and just not charging. And so you got to realize there's an underlayment, and we'll get into this, of about 23, 24% of all DC fast chargers just don't work. That was based on some of the studies that were done out of UC Berkeley with Professor Rempel. But the bigger question you're pinpointing is the climate issue. And so that is a detraction for people that live in these states. But, you know, when this warm weather hits, we get to May or June, you'll see more EVs and you won't hear much talk about it on the news. So the news feed seems to follow the current complaint cycle that's on whatever, Snapchat, or what people are complaining about. That's my take on it. It's seasonal, and it kind of depends on what's going on in the climate when you hear the complaints.
Sven, what's your take on that?
Well, I mean, you said from Brian, maybe more the Michigan Midwest perspective, and for me the California and the West Coast perspective. And in that sense, actually, it's very similar. I mean, when I follow news feeds, chats, newsletters, and such here on the West Coast, which obviously everybody can do because it's a connected world, but maybe my perspective is a little bit more selective in that regard. You actually get very, very similar things you're doing winter as well. Guess why? Because people go from the San Francisco Bay Area skiing in Tahoe, right? And that's like, oh, that's a longer trip that we don't do in summer maybe, or actually you get into colder weather, or you got stuck on I-80 in a snowstorm in your electric vehicle, and then what? So in that regard, it's similar concerns. And as I said in my introduction, I spent a lot of time in Europe also these days. So there's also very, very similar discussion going on, like, are these vehicles ready for prime time? And in this case, prime time meaning less favorable conditions, which is lower temperature, and a couple of others as well. And I think these concerns are all valid. And on the one hand, the engineer in me says, well, they are great problem statements to work on. And then just when you were queuing up the question, Monica, I was thinking, wait a minute, like running an EV in winter, it's in the thinking not completely different from running an earlier combustion engine in winter, when you needed to put a cover in front of the radiator, when you needed a choke in order to start those vehicles. Even before this, you needed to put your ignition on an earlier timing schedule, when you still had these levers on a steering wheel, which probably predates many of us that we remember that, but we see it on historic vehicles. So great engineering statements or problem statements in that regard. From a consumer perspective, we see what happens when things move mainstream. When it goes beyond, like, well, I'm driving my $120,000 electric vehicle to a cocktail party next door, and everybody says, wow, you got one of those? That's awesome. Now it becomes something, I'm driving my whatever 40, 50,000 electric vehicle to Tahoe, and it's like, well, it was easier last year when we still had our combustion engine SUV. So getting into mainstream is a different feat than rolling out a car and just say, here it is. So
use it and it will be perfect. So from both of your perspectives, has the industry gone too far too soon? Is the hype that we're seeing or that we recently saw in terms of the EVs similar to the hype we saw with autonomous vehicles, and now there is again another sobering reality?
Let me interject here. So from what I read into that, and this is about the time we wrote those SAE Edge reports, we had just got injected into the economy that $7 billion infrastructure package about 2 years ago. It was the summer before last summer, it's 2022. And so that hype followed that injection of cash into the society. So municipalities were spending money with EVgo, ChargePoint, and these other companies to install chargers. And there was just a big groundswell, I'd say, in late 2022, early 23. But then reality set in, as Sven was just saying. It's like, oh, I need to use this vehicle to do more than just go to my local grocery store 5 miles back and forth. I'm going to actually use it to replace my ICE vehicle. And that's where I think some of the articles have come out and the complaints in Charger Help and some of these other sites have come out with these concerns. Sven, any comment there?
Yeah, let's see. Absolutely. So regarding Monica's question, too far too soon, has the industry maybe get ahead of itself? So it is actually quite interesting that now in April 2024, we can ask this question and have a reasonable discussion around this. Let's go back maybe 2 or 3 years. And if you had asked back then, has the industry gone too far too soon? We probably would have answered, no, they should have gone faster and further, right? Because things should happen quicker regarding the impact on the climate of traditional vehicles and regarding getting everybody ready for electric vehicles. So I don't think it has been too fast or too soon too far. But what we do see now that you're not done once you have built a great electric vehicle. So the infrastructure needs to go along with it. And that's, I think, where the infrastructure clearly should have gone faster. But it's a traditional chicken egg problem that we see here. So by no means do I think too far too soon. It's much more like, well, it's not even growing pains anymore. It's nothing's perfect and we'll fix it. Right. I think that the time is here for electric vehicles. So nothing wrong with the timing.
Right. So one has to ask, when it comes to the adaptations that we have to make for ourselves as, the planet, we have to decarbonize a lot of things, automotive included, any type of vehicle. Where do we find that particular sweet spot? Does anybody know where we have, say, even the possibility, okay, today you buy a hybrid vehicle, tomorrow we'll give you, extra credit because it is hybrid to go into electric. Yep. How do you guys see?
I don't know, Monica. So it's a good question to discuss, but I don't know if there is an answer like this is the sweet spot, because the sweet spot depends on the use case. And yes. So if you were to build a vehicle, let's just pick one, just because it makes it easy, Amazon with their delivery vehicles. So they might find a sweet spot for that exactly electric vehicle made by Rivian for certain routes. But that doesn't mean that every Amazon truck that's hauling goods across the country should be battery electric at this point. So it really depends on the use case. Now, the thing is, with our vehicles, we have a lot of different use cases. As I mentioned earlier, we might just drive to our cocktail party next door. We should actually ride our bicycle, right? But let's say, well, the weather's not that great and so on. So we get in our automobile. So battery electric, totally fine, because if you need to heat up a combustion engine and all this stuff, that just doesn't make sense for a short drive of 3 or 5 minutes. Now, when we want to go to Tahoe, and that is a different situation, because even a combustion engine might get in a relatively efficient state. And when you then factor everything in, what energy is being used in order to produce the vehicle, and you really look at the whole life cycle, that means it's depending, for one, on many things, from cradle to grave, plus particular use cases. And this is why I think, giving the spectrum of use cases that we use our mobility devices, our automobiles for, I think there's a lot to be had for plug-in hybrids, because the plug-in hybrid runs on electric only when I go to the cocktail party or the grocery store, or maybe my daily commute. That can be done all electrically, and that's good.
You're
But
hitting
it
the
doesn't
nail
have
on
a huge battery that I need to schlep around. So, and if I go on a longer trip, if a combustion engine kicks in like 3-4 times a year, not a bad thing. Brian,
Yeah,
what do
Brian,
you
yes,
think?
absolutely. Brian, what's your take?
You hit the nail on the head. Is for so long, it seems like the last 2 or 3 years, you got about hybrids, and it makes perfect sense for a lot of use cases. Okay, it really is an energy equation, like you said, Sven. If you've got a Daimler diesel truck and you want to replace the same propulsion in a Daimler diesel truck with pure EV, you guys, I talked to Michael Kittner-Meyer when I was doing research on the paper. He's out of Pacific Northwest National Laboratories. He said the cooling hoses for the electric conduit to charge those trucks are going to be about as big around as your laptop, to pump cooling through it to cool off the electricity that goes in to charge those batteries. So that's a mind bender. Why would you need to do that when you could just use the current diesel technology that we have? And then for the customers that need to drive these short trips, like myself in this role I have now, it's work from home most of the time. I don't need my ICE powered truck anymore. I could get a small Chevy Bolt, and EV, and just go back and forth my five miles to town, what I do once a day or so. It's all about use case. Good point.
Now, how would an OEM, traditional OEM that is going into the EV world, plans for so many use cases, and we'll do maybe 3 EV cars? Is this the time, the big opportunity for the hybrid? And that's what we are seeing, going a little lower on the hype or on the intensity of the EVs, but pushing the hybrids more to the forefront. What's your take?
Some of my experience recently with some large OEMs is it's all about inverters, and the inverter sizing, and of course the battery management system that can be adapted to different size batteries. Sven, you probably know that, being in Silicon Valley. So the inverter is key, and also your BMS system. Then you can change the size of the battery or change the size of the vehicle and make adjustments with a lower cost inverter for a BMS system, which is mostly a lot of it's software. Okay. And you can make adjustments that way to tailor to the vehicle size.
Yep. So that definitely is very important, and specifically to your question. So, what should OEMs do, or what is the silver bullet? That I can't imagine that there is something like a sweet spot, as we discussed for the use cases earlier, which depends on the sales volume. So it certainly is a difference if you're selling 500,000 vehicles or 5 million vehicles a year, or even 10 million vehicles a year. And this is really where we see that OEMs are still trying to figure that out, how to do it. Meaning, do they actually build an electric vehicle on a proprietary platform? So that's our electric vehicle platform that's really optimized for battery and skateboard type of architecture or something like this. And that's going to be the future. Or are we trying to put as many different powertrain variations under one hat as possible? Meaning the battery electric with a 80 kilowatt hour, maybe 100 kilowatt hour capacity, and a plug-in hybrid, and maybe even an efficient combustion engine only, all into the same vehicle as some OEMs are doing. And the pundits then go back and forth. Sometimes those who are all into an only electric vehicle platform, they are the smartest players in the world. And then they are like, oh, but these others are also very smart because they are hedging their bets and they can really shift their production capacity left and right depending on the EV demand, because if the EV demand is low, they can maybe put in a hybrid powertrain into it or something like that. So
Right.
that's what the industry is still trying to figure out. But I think for now, with the volatility in the market, and now I almost sound like an investor, I think for the OEMs, it's wise to keep it flexible.
Right. Brian, would you agree?
Yeah, especially you've seen some of that recently with, I'll just name names, with GM and Ford. They had electric truck platforms like the Hummer. They've spent, millions of dollars on that, on the Hummer pure EV. And, people wait in line to buy them. I have a friend that's going to buy one. They're over six figures to purchase those. But then they softened a little bit and they got the electric Silverado at GM, and then Ford's got their Lightning. And so they've kind of reset some of their priorities, and they're looking back at hybrids now. And Toyota and Honda have done that all along the last 5 years. They just kept plugging away with their hybrid technology. So you got to be flexible, like Sven said, but you can't just follow the culture whim on what's hot on your cell phone the last 10 minutes.
Right, and just adding to it. So when students ask me, why is it that Elon Musk is so smart and the other OEMs are not getting it, then I say, well, is it really what you think? Because I would advise like a traditional OEM to really be flexible about what kind of vehicles they manufacture. So that a traditional OEM, Brian just mentioned a couple. Would I advise them as of next year to have only battery electric vehicles? That's it. Probably I would not advise them. But would I advise Elon Musk to look into hybrid vehicles or something like this? Probably not. Right. And so there's really something, and that gets me excited about the automotive industry still every day. It's this history, it's the branding, it's what customers expect from a vehicle brand. And that defines obviously what they buy and what they are willing to pay for. So that's, I guess, where every OEM, one way or another, is on their own journey trying to figure out how to architect those vehicles and how to orchestrate the sales volume. And again, flexibility is probably key.
Right. And this is no trivial task.
Oh, no.
No, it isn't. Mainly if you are now looking into the immense output of Chinese electric cars. That's, at least so far, we haven't seen the good and bad. We just hear about the good, but we haven't seen them enough on the roads today, in our roads here in the United States, to see if they will make it or not. We don't know. Yeah. But the truth is, the global market of the global automotive market seems to be expanding in terms of numbers of vehicles, but decreasing in terms of the number of vehicles in each niche.
Okay.
Did I get this wrong? Or do I make sense?
Or is it what you're getting at, Monica? It seems to be there's more tailored vehicles. Is that what you're saying?
Or yes, for the use cases.
For the use cases, okay. Yeah, like Rivian.
So, and then if that is correct, I'm here, to be proven wrong. For those particular use cases, the number of vehicles might be smaller, but then the price goes up. How does that work?
That's good.
Or there is a way to actually balance this, so you have something for everybody. It's all affordable, and everybody's happy. No. What do you think?
Sven, you might see a lot more of that where you're
Well, let's see. So you have a couple of questions, I guess, integrated there, Monica. So one is on China. Happy to talk about this, and the latter part, you seem to be going more into like specialized, almost purpose-built vehicles for a certain application, which then only work in this niche, but therefore are priced higher. So that part, our vehicles going to be more specialized and tailored to a certain use case. Some of them, yes. I mentioned the Amazon delivery truck earlier. Brian mentioned Rivian, for instance, which is for now still smaller sales figures. It's, in my view, it's a lifestyle electric vehicle that I see a lot here in Silicon Valley, probably because Rivian has set up shop here, but also because it's just a great thing for people to get their electric pickup truck and schlep their surfing gear to Half Moon Bay or something like that. So you do see this. I'm not sure if that is a large general trend, because what I said earlier, everything from going to the dinner party to going to Lake Tahoe or something like this in winter, is actually what mobility is and what we appreciate about mobility. That we have this independence, we have this basically Swiss Army knife of mobility device that it can do it all. And I think this is going to stay. However, if and that is an if. I'm not quite sure about this if yet. If shared mobility is gonna be a sizable part of the spectrum, that means 10, maybe 20% of whatever miles traveled or revenue of mobility, whatever you want to call it, 10, 20% plus, that means you can have these custom-made vehicles at a decent price point. That's the perfect vehicle for a ride-hailing service. That's the perfect vehicle for a shared drive. That's maybe the perfect vehicle for all of this being automated. So that might happen, but it needs to be a sizable market share, because we have seen in the past vehicles that were more custom made as well. For instance, I mean, the U.S. Postal Office vehicles, sure, they work in the niche, but does that mean that the local bakery business uses the same vehicle? Not really. They get a Toyota Prius or something like this.
Yes, that's true.
So I gotta see about this. If I don't know, Brian, what you make of this, like niches, and is that the trend?
Well, you certainly see that with Rivian and of course Tesla, and there's a few other automotive EV makers. Mullen, I think, is their name. There's some people I barely have heard of, and they're out there trying to get business and trying to get, and they're realizing, like Rivian did, it's very expensive to tool up a new vehicle. You know, it's one thing to buy inverters and battery management systems and batteries, but it's the other thing to buy dies and sheet metal and that. So that's been the real dilemma for some of these companies I've watched along the way. So, and one business case that's been really good is like the Chevy Bolt. I know Professor Rempel, one of our contributors, you know him, Monica, he drives a Chevy Bolt and he loves it. It's a very inexpensive EV. You can fit like 2.5 people in it, but it works for him and he just loves it.
Right. And that's basically what it is. What works for you and gives the OEMs the critical mass to make it affordable, right?
Those two words, critical mass, right?
Yeah,
critical mass. That's exactly right.
Look, it really is when we buy a vehicle, and when I say buy, that includes leasing and then all these options as well. We are making a decision what we think fits our mobility needs over the next 3-5 years or something like this. And that is not just like getting my kids to soccer practice. That does include getting grandma and grandpa on a road trip. That does include have to get stuff from IKEA. That does include I don't know, a weekend out with my buddies and we're having fun. That does include getting good efficiency on my daily commute. And obviously also it does include being safe on the road. And also it does include, what does my neighbor think? right? So it is this jack of all trades.
It still does, right? Believe it or not.
Well, my neighbors actually know me more for my 3 bicycles than they know me for my automobile. But that's fine. That's maybe what I can say. It was the last name Biker.
Right.
Sure.
We also have some interesting questions that came from the audience. So let's see. Are gas diesel station locations likely the best locations for level 3 chargers? What do you guys think?
I've got an opinion on that, but I'll jump in. From what I've read in some research, there's a real commercial advantage to have them located in the same location as where the diesel guy pumps his big truck and the minivan pumps gas, etc. One is you get cross exposure. You get, it's just another form of propulsion. There's your DC fast charge stations, a row of 8 of them, let's say, off to the side. And then you've got the gasoline fuel pumps. By the way, all diesel and gas fuel pumps are covered. I've never seen a naked pump unless you've seen it on an old movie on Route 66 in the middle of Nevada. Why are there so many electric DC fast charge stations out there in the open and they're not covered? I've just recently started to see coverings for them. That's been a beef, Monica, that issue. So you get that proximity. Yeah, they need to be far away. They need to not be on top of each other because electricity and combustible fuel doesn't mix. But it's its own charge point protocol, its own communication systems, et cetera, over the gasoline fuel pump. So they're going to communicate differently, and they got to have the advantage of going into that convenience store and buying that $3 pop or $5 sandwich or whatever, because that's the business model for these big DC fast charge stations that they're already planning with the money that they got from the administration a couple years ago. They want to combine that with your 25-minute stop or 20-minute stop with you going in that store and purchasing things. That's my opinion. I think that'll work.
Yeah, I basically agree with everything that Brian said, that it is a lot for convenience, and also, especially as people are transitioning from driving their combustion engine vehicle to getting an electric vehicle, it would certainly be helpful to know, the gas station on my commute, I can also charge my vehicle there if I need to. So that would be helpful, that make it as easy as possible for consumers to transition. That would definitely help. Now, I'm not sure how well that would work actually in reality. One point, Brian already said that the combustible fuel and electric installations, you need to keep them apart. And I don't know if there's enough space for that you can just put it on the same lot. And also, when you look at these fast charging stations, you typically see, I don't know, let's say 8 vehicles or something like this stage. That's actually quite some space. And I don't know if you have those at those gas stations. I mean, those somewhere along the freeways, sure, that would be the place. But I'm thinking about a local gas station in town that might not work that well. But the local gas station maybe doesn't need to have it because 80% of the charging still happens at home. So that's what we consistently see in these studies. People charge at home, and that's typically it's not level 3, it's level 2 charging. So we're basically overnight to get your vehicle recharged, which is fine. So in that sense, I can definitely see along the interstate system where you have the space, where you have the need, that you put these charging stations in close proximity where you get your diesel or gasoline today. In town, maybe not so much.
Good point. I'm thinking of the Buc-ee's model. If you guys have traveled on I-65 or I-80, there's a big place called Buc-ee's. You've probably seen it. They're huge. They take up 100 acres.
Space is not a problem there.
And space is not a problem because they're in the middle of a cornfield. Yeah. But you're right. In
So,
town, it's very tight. Yeah.
We have here an interesting question who comes from an SAE member who lives in Northern Ontario. I don't know if it's a man or a woman, but are there extreme cold weather operating issues, meaning below 40 degrees centigrade, with a cable rigidity, for instance, vehicle connector freeze up, charger components or inability of the vehicle to accept a charge due to low battery internal temperature? And if so, how are these issues being addressed?
Mm.
Wow.
Well,
Yeah.
I can say
Wow is right.
go ahead, Brian.
well, and from my old days testing at GM on some of these use case conditions, that is the spec limit, minus 40C, that was in our written guidelines. I see Sven nodding his head.
Yep.
For most of these component manufacturers, tell me what I got to validate to, minus 40C is usually it. And that's from a duty cycle, yeah, Northern Ontario, Kappas Casing, Timmins, that area, yeah, it gets that cold every night sometimes in January and February. So I had thought when I read this question before, maybe our battery management systems need to be refined better, and that's through software and how you warm up that battery. But that takes so much time. And Sven, you might be closer on the software side.
Yeah. So let's see. For one, let's start with the rigidity of the cable or something like this. Yes, yes, and yes. So these are all let's say important issues. I'm not sure if I should say these are all valid concerns, because this is where we should really expect the engineers to basically engineer a solution to the specifications that Brian just mentioned. Minus 40 to plus 120 or something like that, what you usually have for an automobile. And getting a cable and a connector and so on to work under these conditions, that is known to engineers how to do it. Now, having the battery accept charge and even more to deliver charge to the inverter and to the motor, that is a different question. And that's where probably many of our audience have heard that battery chemistry really doesn't work that well the colder it gets. And this is, as Brian says, where software kicks in, where you might want to limit the usage of a battery, make sure that you don't stress it too much, which definitely applies to high temperatures, maybe even more. And at lower temperatures, where you then might need to put something in to keep your battery warm overnight, which is maybe relatively straightforward if you park your vehicle at 8 p.m. and you need it again at 6 a.m. in the morning. But what if between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. there's like a week in between? Do you keep the battery warm over
for
7
a week
days?
without using, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And again, this is where we might need to think back where things were coming from with combustion engines as well. So when back in the days we parked a vehicle for a long time, we needed to take certain care of it. And over time, this was all built in, much of it through software, including like fuel ignition and things like that. We don't need a choke anymore. And that's something that needs to be pointed out to the users. Hey, it's a different thing when you operate your vehicle in Arizona compared to Ontario, and it has always been like that. But I think they can be overcome. The big challenge certainly is that with battery electric vehicles in a cold climate, we see a reduction in range a third or something like that.
Yes.
And then running back to the opening statement that you made for the session here, we are back to range anxiety.
Right. Yes. Yes. So let me see. Does anyone know, and this is another question we received, does anyone know if there is currently an adapter available for CHAdeMO vehicles such as Nissan and Mitsubishi to use other CCS or the new standard? CHAdeMO vehicles are still in production and will need fair and equal access to refueling infrastructure. Brian, what do you make of it?
Yeah, and that's where I've talked to some of the guys in DECRA before, and I wrote this paper and talked to some of them recently. That has been an issue because there's Leaf owners that are complaining, Nissan Leaf owners, because they use the CHAD, I can't even say the CHAdeMO connector, which is a different type of design. And what I've heard is that they're going to start making an adapter for that. Now, some nefarious people are already selling these adapters in Europe, and they want like over $1,000 US dollars for that. Converted to euro, it's pretty expensive, but they are making it available to accept an inverter to adapt that. So that's a Mitsubishi Outlander, I think, uses that Chad DMO, and also the Nissan Leaf vehicles. So that's what I've heard, Sven. I don't know if you've heard anything.
Well, no, I basically just agree with what you just said, Brian. I will say I'm not a charge adapter expert, but I do know there's adapters for each and everything out there. You just need to get it. But I'm not necessarily advocating to just getting each and any kind of adapter, because obviously they need to be safe and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, let me back off here a little bit. So interoperability is an issue still in that industry. And now, as we are transitioning from the J1772, so the combo adapter, to the new North American charge standard, also known as the Tesla standard, there we will have again issues with adapters. And it just tells us again how easy it is or was with combustion engine vehicles. Every gas hose is the same. Diesel and gasoline are different because you don't want to mix them up. And then that just tells us the convenience that we've all come to appreciate and in the end take for granted, not even think about it anymore. So
Right.
with electric vehicles, it is different. Because if you are mixing up different charge systems, then it can be pretty catastrophic and tragic, which is why I would not just use each and every adapter that you can get your hands on.
Absolutely,
But that's
yes.
something that the industry needs to figure out to make sure that consumers get at a reasonable price point an adapter for these needs.
That's a really good point. Yeah, and the fact that both the CEOs of Ford and GM struck a big win with Elon Musk. I think it was about last summer where they agreed to that comment.
Started in May, I think. Yeah.
I have another question here that seems to be very to the point. What about imposing automatic fire detection, alarm, and extinction measures in case an EV actually catches fire? What do you guys think?
Well, they do have some of these measures in there, right? So, I mean, these batteries are monitored internally very, very meticulously and carefully. And if they have like a thermal event,
right,
also known as a fire, then they basically cut off that part of the battery, or basically the whole battery, but in particular that part where you can spot the
those
thermal
cells,
event, so that hopefully it doesn't spread out more. But I think the question goes to a point: should you have similar, like in your home, like a sprinkler system or something like that? You can probably do something like that. I mean, you can do many things. Also, let's not forget, a combustion engine vehicle also is known to catch fire every once in a while. And I'm not really sure if I've seen statistics to what extent one is more likely to the other. It's just, in my perception, just more publicized when an electric vehicle catches fire. So when a gasoline vehicle catches fire, we don't hear maybe that much about it anymore. You can always do more. So that's the thing. There's unfortunately nothing like absolute safety. It would definitely be something to look into these fire prevention mechanisms. Monica, that would make for a good edge report. You should get back to ask the question. No, seriously, because it is a controversial one. Should you do more, or is it what we have good enough?
Right.
I don't know the answer to that question. Maybe
I can tell you from experience, though. You have to prevent the battery from getting to that temperature, and that's your BMS system, Sven, as you said, because once the lithium cells ignite, you can't stop it. I was personally involved with one. I won't say where, but I had to yell at the engineer to get out of the vehicle when I saw the smoke. And within 40 seconds, the flames were 20 feet high. That quick. And that's all I'll say.
You don't want to be in that car in that situation. Right. Yeah. Definitely not.
Well, but I really, it's important to me that we put this into perspective. I also don't want to be in a car where there's smoke coming out of a gasoline tank.
Oh, absolutely.
right?
I'm the first one out.
That's
Yes.
again, I think this is where we should take at least a half minute here to say this. It's not an either or. It's thermal issues are a problem with electric vehicles, but they are also a problem with gasoline powered vehicles.
Yes.
And
Yes, they are.
again, that actually, I'm serious. That what might make for a good edge report to look at these, like, is it really like day or night? Is one much more risky than the other? And if so, should we take additional measures in order to prevent this?
That's a good
Again,
point.
if there's smoke, I mean, hey, look, on an airplane, when they always tell you these days, if there's smoke or your battery on your cell phone is getting warm, yeah, that's an issue. So we all know about this. But let's don't forget, you put your kids on the back seat in your gasoline car, they are sitting on 15 gallons of flammable
Yes.
fluid.
Yes, absolutely. We have a new question from the audience. What could be an ideal revenue model for charging stations? Any takes?
Candy bar. Well, look, I mean, I'm joking in a way, but we actually did discuss this in my class at Stanford Business School quite a bit. So it seems like that you cannot make much money out of the sales of electrons. So the charging is not really a great well, revenue maybe, but not a profit model. So selling electricity is also highly regulated. That goes on state by state, but basically different states put similar regulation out there. So it should not be that someone makes more money when you sell more electricity, because they would encourage actually the usage of energy. I'm not sure if you should do this. So you really want to create this Silicon Valley term experience around it. So what do you do?
Okay, tell us more.
20 minutes, 30 minutes, what have you, when you are there. And it starts with candy bars. And I mean, whatever you might want to do in like 20 minutes or something like this. A coffee shop obviously comes to mind. You can people encourage to purchase something. You can have like a little outlet of whatever. So it's really what you have around the time spent in that location, more than, hey, I'm selling electrons and therefore I have a good business model, which actually does include that shopping malls use this to.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Right. Yeah. It's,
Well,
yeah.
one thought I had was that people who typically buy EVs, typically, and I don't want to stereotype, they're conscious about, the environment, conscious about what they take in holistically in their body. So I mean, those kind of marketing things, you're not just going to sell ice cream or whatever. You got to sell salads, high-end coffees, high-end herbal teas. See the point I'm making? It's
Yes.
more, I'm kind of special. I'm buying this vehicle. I'd like the neighbors to think I care.
It's a lifestyle.
Lifestyle. That's the point.
It's a lifestyle thing, and
Lifestyle.
I think Sven also had pointed to that, because yes, it comes together.
And almost more mundane. I mean, hey, if you can change diapers, right? And if there's like I mean, how do you turn this into revenue? But if you make it a membership model or something like this, so you have to get innovative, because, and you might want to start from the gas station model, where the transaction is like, give or take 8 minutes, right? Something like that. Not quite 5 minutes, but not necessarily 10 minutes either. So somewhat in between, 8 minutes. And that's like candy bars, a soda pop, or cigarettes, what have you, beef jerky. That's what people get. Now translate that into like the 20 minutes that we're talking, or the 30 minutes that we're talking about. And then you'll find something there's quite something that you can do. And the people are probably willing to pay for it if they get a good experience, if it saves them time, if it's less of a hassle.
And if they can do other things meanwhile,
that
are meaningful to them.
Yeah.
Armin,
So look,
right?
for me, when I had one of my earlier EV experiences, it was in 2011 actually, with an electric vehicle that should remain unnamed, but there were not that many around back then, that had a stated range of 100 miles. And I was going to San Francisco for a thing, and I was hoping to do it round trip, and that I'd be able to make it round trip. Didn't work out, so I basically then went to the dealership of that particular vehicle make, because they offered level 2 charging, which was quite something back then. And then I was stuck in this mall. It was like a chain of coffee, that unfortunately the chain that I don't like. It was like a steakhouse. Now I'm a vegetarian. That also didn't help me that much. So I fit maybe some of the stereotypes.
Lifestyle choice. Yeah.
But it was an unpleasant experience, actually. And then I was just thinking over and over again, well, in a combustion engine vehicle, it could have been home by now. Could have been home by now.
Yeah.
Well, 2 hours later, I finally was home. But it is really about this experience, and not from an engineering standpoint, but from a business strategy standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, very interesting problem statements that I can encourage our listeners to work on.
Yeah. We have a last question here just arrived, which is a response to the charger adapter conversation. Let's see. So the topic of conversation is supposed to be roadblocks for infrastructure, but we are not talking about the 12 years worth of vehicles that are going to need adapters, of interoperability issues, general reliability issues of existing equipment, permitting issues, site load math, or even the mention that a lot of the charging networks, that is to say, something about not being responsible for damage if using an adapter. Can you talk to that? So we have 8 minutes.
I'll kick off a little bit from talking to Professor Rempel, at Stanford or Berkeley, UC Berkeley. I'm sorry. You said Stanford. Sorry, I got it confused.
That's all right.
Definitely different schools. Anyways, the 2 prox pins on a J1772, they get most of the damage, the ground pin, and then the prox pin, the ground pin and prox pin, because when they drop, people carelessly drop it on the cement. There's no grass there. There's no wood chips. It's cement usually, or asphalt. That prox pin and that ground pin are typically the ones that break. So that's part of the issue here too. And then when you try to shove an adapter on there, it's not going to fit because you got a little bit of chip or you got some plastic hanging up. I think that's kind of what the person asking the question may be getting at, that you've got a 12-year-old Nissan Leaf or a Toyota Prius, and you need to charge it. I'm guessing that's what they meant.
Yeah, I think that person's also referring to, if we are switching now to a different standard, the North American Charge Standard, also known as the Tesla standard. So what about all these older vehicles that are not compatible with it, and is there going to be an adapter? And it's 2 things obviously regarding an adapter. One, is it like, does it fit mechanically? So does it actually connect?
Right.
And then does the communication standard actually help or work actually? And that's where then software updates probably come in. So you might need to update some of the software on those vehicles so that they have the right communication protocol with these newer charge standards.
Yeah.
So that is an issue that I'm also a bit concerned with. That how do we make sure, as the charge standard now is changing, at least, I don't know if it's even going to evolve further, let's say throughout this decade, which is still somewhat early days for electric vehicles. How do we make sure that those who committed early to an electric vehicle are not being left behind? That we now say, well, you got a 2018 electric vehicle, tough luck. Get a new one if you want.
Yeah, you can't do that.
It cannot be the solution. So that concern is well taken, actually.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Brian, any final thoughts?
Well, I'm just wondering, like at my last app I got on my phone, my EVgo, it kind of parallels to this question. Does that app keep up to date with a 2010 Prius? does it keep up to date so it has some interoperability clues on your app? So that is a good point. The person asking the question, that's a good point.
Yes, thank you. Sven, any last thoughts?
Well, you mentioned it at some point briefly, also automated vehicles, and when you asked earlier about are we going too far too soon, is it the same with automated vehicles? I was thinking then when you made that comment, there's some similarities. In a way, it's very different because in my view, electric vehicles are ready. Automated vehicles, like level 4 automated vehicles, not to the same extent, even if Waymo, in my view, works very, very well here in San Francisco, but doesn't work, for instance, in Tahoe, to keep up with that analogy. But in both cases, it is infrastructure that is slowing it down. So I would think that infrastructure could help automated vehicles big time. If that's better lane markings, that's machine readable road signs, that might be a communication infrastructure, we could be much further along with automated vehicles. And that's the same with electric vehicles, obviously. As much as we are talking about electric vehicle charging, that is obviously all infrastructure. And that gets me to the point why we are talking so much about mobility and not just the new automobile, because mobility, in my view, includes like the whole ecosystem, another Silicon Valley buzzword, which is we are not done when the vehicle is ready. We are done when the whole ecosystem is ready, and that requires a whole lot of infrastructure, and that's what we need to figure out. Otherwise, the great vehicle remains in the garage and doesn't know where to go because the infrastructure is not ready.
That's very true. Yes. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate your input, your time, your patience with us sometimes until you get this together. Thank you, Cici. Thank you, all of you in the audience for being with us.